Hey, what's up, guys? Alex here. So today we'll be finishing up on the four empty squares endgame puzzles. We're going to be just finishing up on puzzle number 7 to 10. So let's quickly jump into puzzle number 7. So over here it is white's turn to play, and you have 32 white discs on the board. And essentially you have four empty squares remaining, so that means that you don't have natural parity, so that should have been a pass and move earlier on, since you are playing as white and you're playing into an even square region in the end game. So pretty much over here, the main point here is not really about counting, but rather playing logical sequences to in order to maximize the number of this in such a scenario whereby you also lose parity either way. But how do you go ahead to actually kind of maximize and protect your discs? So over here, we have three choices. We have F1, we have G1, we have G2. So essentially, if you're faced with kind of like this reverse Tetris block shape with four squares remaining, what you really want to do, for this intuitively, usually such a jagged shape, if you can see this particular like a mini pyramid for these six discs over here that forms like a mini triangle over here. So usually how you want to attack this kind of shape intuitively without even counting or without even trying to figure out what's the best line, even just by the natural shape, what you should always do is actually just jump into the move that is making a diagonal cut across. So that even applies across for the mid game. So for the end game, it's exceptionally true. Why is this good? Because if you were to play into G1, and let's say your opponent follows with F1, essentially you kind of get the X square and you kind of sweep the discs on the horizontal row number 2, and you also flip the disc along this column, column G, and in return you would only just kind of give your opponent this diagonal over here, which is either way expected, regardless of how the outcome plays out. So that's quite natural, and also because if you were to start with G2 over here, what he would do is just grab the corner, and then you basically have probably the only choice to play is the G1, and he would just sweep back the discs in a very nice wrap up manner. But if you were to just play a point move that cuts across diagonally, you can actually kind of nullify that effect of an entire wraparound sweep. So yeah, intuitively, if you just look at these three options, usually just go for that move that is pointing out across into the middle of this kind of jagged or staircase shape. So go for the middle one, and then no matter where he plays, you can actually kind of respond naturally to either side of it. So let's go ahead with going for this natural intuition logic, because if you were to play to F1, he basically just sweeps across, and then you play in, and you basically lose more than what is necessary in terms of the progression. You would also even lose this particular disc over here at B1, which wouldn't be the case if you were to start off with G1 instead of F1. So let's just go ahead with G1, play out the sequence. So the best move based on the computer is to play to F1, and finally you take G2, which is what we talked about earlier. So even though either way we lose this diagonal across in the final move due to natural parity that black has right now, but we do actually get to try to sweep the horizontal disc, these three discs, which would be key to retaining a high number of discs. And at the same time, when you do that point move across, you kind of occupy this column in advance without allowing your opponent to sweep any discs in a wrap up manner. So in that sense, you actually maximize the number of discs that you have on the board. So finally, we play the last move at G2, and black basically plays the last move to wrap up the game, but still has insufficient number of discs. So over here, you basically win 35 to 29. Okay, so let's move on to the next puzzle, puzzle number 8. So puzzle number 8 right now, it's black's turn to play. So over here you can see that there is a particular potential weakness over here that white may actually jump into um, H4 to sweep the inner discs these three in particular, and also these two, but these two are actually reversible if you were to play the next move over here. But just in terms of natural parity, usually trying in an effort to actually try to retain parity, what we want to do is actually play into an odd square region first instead of an even square region. So if you just consider the top left, this is somewhat like an even square region that is connected diagonally. So if white were to play, let's say if it were white's turn right now, and if white were to play to b2, you would then be able to take a1 and sweep across. But in this case, because it's your turn to play, you probably wouldn't want to start off with an even region, but rather go for an odd region. So these two somewhat combines into a region together, but you can definitely see that if you were to play h2, your opponent is able to play h4. But if you were to play h4, your opponent is not able to play h2. So intuitively, that would also tell you that you might want to start with h4, given that it's an odd region. And basically, when you play h4, white has no other option but to rather just to play the x square, which you can play to natural parity and just sweep across this entire diagonal row and this horizontal row. And when you re-establish this x square disk after black by black, you can sweep across the second row and get a huge chunk of this. So needless to say, definitely natural parity is important. If you were to start off with this corner and white were to jump in over here, you allow white to control this entire second row without any chance of sweeping these discs. And at the same time, let's say if you were to jump in here and white were to choose here, you would still lose out on this entire row of this, and also capturing these two interior discs, and you also lose these three interior discs over here. So it wouldn't make sense at all. So definitely you need to prioritize this particular move here, which is the odd region. So let's jump in, and then basically, yep, white goes for the only move available, and then we go for the corner sweep. If we were to go to h2 first, we wouldn't be able to sweep this entire horizontal row by h2 followed by a1. But if we were to do a1 first, we would establish this, and finally when we come back to h2, we can sweep another additional 5 discs. So that is a very key important point here. So after we've established that, we sweep back and we win the game with 39-25. Quite a comfortable margin over here in this case. So let's move on to the ninth endgame puzzle for the 4 empty squares. So over here, it is black's turn to play. So earlier in puzzle number 7, we talked about this intuitive nature of trying to play endgame moves in terms of, in an odd region, you have that jagged shape in terms of the squares, and you want to do like a diagonal cut across. So this is kind of similar in some sense. Basically, what you want to do and leverage upon is, right now it's black's turn to play, and you only have the option to play with the lower left region. So it might be tempting to actually play a move such as b7 on first look, because you can sweep so many discs on 3 different directions. But even towards the endgame, mobility is key. If you do this immediately when you sweep all of this to black, you realize that white can actually take 3 consecutive moves to end off the game, and you would likely lose by a huge margin, because when you go for black, this one over here at b7, you basically clear off these two white discs into black, and these black discs. So when white plays to d8 over here, there is a swindle, and white can continue to play to b8, and then finally taking the last move at g1 over here. So definitely that would not be sufficient number of discs for you by losing 2 consecutive moves. In fact, 3 consecutive moves to your opponent. So what you want to do is actually to try to retain the moves as much as possible. So if you were to just kind of weigh between these 2 moves, usually what you want to do is kind of play to your strength, which is this corner, and you choose the move that is nearer to your corner because you're advancing from left to right. So probably from right to left is not a great idea. So intuitively, you want to move from left to right. So we go with b8, and basically white goes for the best move over here to protect this row on the 7th row, essentially. So we only have 1 move, and we grab this, and then we basically end the game with 34-30. So that's just enough discs for us to win the game. So let's move on to the last endgame puzzle for today for 4 empty squares. So right now it is black's turn to play 4 empty squares. So both sides are even region. So over here, it's kind of natural to actually think that there isn't any difference for both because since both are even regions, they don't really they're somewhat far away from one another. Um, there is a fallacy or there is a potential that you might think that there are no differences between both regions, but in fact, right now, as black, you actually have a direct threat to capture the corner over here. But if you were to take the corner right now, you would flip these two discs as well, and you would give white one move over here. And finally, when you play the X square, white would just sweep the discs. However, you can actually consider a swindle. So when you consider another option, what happens is when you take the X square here, white is forced to take the corner and clears off this entire lead diagonal. So once this entire lead diagonal is cleared off, you realize you can perform what is said to be a swindle. Um, Basically we can take both H1 with no black discs along the main diagonal. So basically we wouldn't be flipping any discs, and therefore we can also take H2 in succession. So what we want to do here is to basically achieve that swindle. And if we were to start off with either of these two moves, we will lose the game. But if we start off with the swindle, which is the X square, which is definitely counterintuitive in some sense, but in such a scenario, that's the best approach actually to try to kind of explore whether you have a swindle when you have like a strong access to a corner and kind of just feed off this lead diagonal to your opponent. So let's start off with the X square. So basically white flips off. So this is the main diagonal that white has cleared off without a choice, and therefore we can play this swindle, and we basically get 24 plus 7, 31 disc, and the final move we get 4 additional discs in order to win off the game. So this is like a pass since there are no legal moves for white. So black can finally just take the last move and win the game. So we win the game with 35 to 29. So I hope this four empty puzzles, four empty squares puzzles has actually helped you. So I'm sure that if you go on to play and practice a few more, a couple more, or even finish up the entire collection of puzzles, your end game would definitely improve by quite a huge margin. So what you want to do is just try to practice different type of end game puzzles and kind of understand what the different patterns require you to actually finish up. So if we just kind of do a recap earlier, we saw that in puzzle number 7, we needed to go for the count, like the natural intuitive move is to just kind of capitalize on this jagged shape and just go for this point move in the middle. Like it's kind of like shooting arrows from the foundation. So you have the foundation on the bottom and to the left. So what you want to do is like nullify the effect of black, which black is having on the top edge and the right edge. So as you're approaching to the top right, you have the strength of this foundation, or what I like to call anchor and field theory. So this is your anchor and this is the remaining playing field. So naturally what you want to do is just try to minimize the impact of your opponent's strength, which is the right edge and the top edge, towards the remaining regions of the playout. So yeah, similarly over here, this is about retaining parity and also trying to skip a move. And over here is more about playing to your strength, keeping to the sides. And this one is more about just feeding off and getting a swindle. So with that, thank you very much for joining me, and I'll see you in the next video. Goodbye.